So, we've been, as many of you probably have, just so we're talking about the religion numbers here. I've been tracking them. Like, as I said, the pre-election numbers did not look like much was going to move. And for the most part, that's true. There's a couple of exceptions, but I did want to give you, just the kind of lay of the land. One thing that I'll just say out front that continues to astonish me, even as someone who looks at these numbers day in and day out, is that there are no two groups in the electorate that are further apart than white evangelical Protestants and African American Protestants. Like, if you sort the entire religious landscape to the most Trump supportive to the least Trump supportive, those are the groups that are on the polls. Now, think about that for a minute. Every time I say this, I always think about H. Richard Niebuhr's great piece that he wrote 100 years ago called The Social Sources of Denominationalism. And he described what he called the scandal of the color line in the church, and that we've become so used to it. I think that when I say that, it's like, oh, well, of course, African Americans are Democrats and white evangelicals are Republicans. But like thinking about what that really means theologically, I think is like something I think is worth us kind of pausing on. So just to give you the spread here from the exit polls, white evangelical Protestants, 81% support for Trump. That's pretty much dead on. They were 84 in 2020. So it's pretty much within the margin of error, particularly for an exit polls. 8 and 10 continue to support Trump. On the other end of the spectrum, it's 13% of African-American Protestants that supported Trump. 86% of Black Protestants supported Harris, right? So these are just literally mirror images of each other. And you think about, many African Americans understand themselves as evangelicals, share a lot of the theological beliefs, sing the same hymns, etc. And yet, this is where they are. The other big thing to say about the vote is that the big thing that always stands out are that kind of white Christians tend to cluster together. We focus on white evangelicals, but it is also white Catholics and white non-evangelical Protestants that also vote about 6 and 10 for Trump. They did in 2016 and in 2020, and they did again in this election. Latino Protestants were right there with them. And for those of you who know, that group tends to be heavily Pentecostal, charismatic, and evangelical themselves. About 6 and 10 voted for Trump. And then on the other end, we've got, Jewish Americans, only 21% support for Trump, the unaffiliated, 25% for Trump. Those of other religions, non-Jewish, non-Christian, so Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, those groups we can't measure separately, but all together, only 3 and 10 support for Trump. The one place that we did see a shift that we did not expect seeing, and it was the thing that caught the exit polls by surprise across the board, was the shift among Latinos. And we see that filtering into the religious numbers as well. For the first time ever, we had a majority of Latino Catholics, so barely 52%, but they're supporting Trump. And I've already said 63% of Latino Protestants supporting Trump. But that shift among Catholics, Latino Catholics and Latino Protestants, there was a double-digit shift among both of those groups toward Trump. And that's just part of I don't think there's anything in the religions themselves that explains that. I think it was part of the larger shift among Latinos into the space that we see spilling over, into, and the one reason I say that, particularly for Latino Catholics that move slightly more, it was an abortion, right? On those numbers, Latino Catholics are actually 6 and 10 support abortion rights, which is something most people don't know, as do white Catholics, by the way, and still majority voted for Trump. So that's kind of the complicated piece of this, but they weren't brought over because of their support for abortion. And I'm going to show you just one other thing, and then I'll shut up here. But I don't ever do this, but since we're live, I'm going to share my screen real quick and just show you like one chart that I kind of mocked up here. It's you're getting a little preview. This is going to be in a Time magazine piece that I just wrapped up, but I'm going to give you a preview here. So basically, this is actually not from the exit polls. But it lines up with the exit polls. This is from PRI's American Values Survey. But I just wanted to kind of collapse all the groups here so that you can kind of see, if we look at like white Christians versus Christians of color, that gap that I was pointing out here is just remarkable. And so this is all white Christians. So it's white evangelicals, white non-evangelical Protestants, and white Catholics all together. But it's 2/3, right, of that group was kind of supporting Trump. And it's just a mirror image of the rest of the country, right? You kind of look at Christians of color, and this includes Latino, African American, AAPI, and others, non-Christian religions like Jews, Muslims, Hindus, Buddhists, kind of all put together, and then the religiously unaffiliated. They're all just about 3 in 10 support for Trump. So I think this is something I think that's really worth. There's like political implications of this, but I also think for those of us of faith, there are deep, unaccounted for theological questions to be raised here as well.
So on that topic, I think we should start taking some questions here. And I know we're all tracking, so I'll just take a theological question that popped up, and then we'll.
Can I just ask Robby for one final clarification on the numbers before we do the theology piece?
Yeah.
And that is, Robby, can you tell us what the percentage of each one of those groups was in the electorate?
So it looks like that most groups turned out about, I think this is what you're asking, Diana, at rates fairly comparable to their proportion of the population, with one big exception. And that's been true in previous elections. But here it looks like white evangelical Protestants turned out at much higher rates than other Americans did. So that means they're overrepresented in the electorate compared to their position in the population. My best guess is they're about 5 percentage points overrepresented. So they make up about 14% of the country, 13.7% to be precise, but 14% of the country. When we look at the exit polls and you look at that white evangelical Protestant thing that we see in the publicly released exit polls, that big group made up 22% of the electorate, but we know there's some Catholics in there. So to make it apples to apples, you have to subtract 3. So my best guess is that white evangelical Protestants are 14% of the electorate of the population, but we're probably somewhere around 19% of the electorate, right? So they are overrepresented by about 5 percentage points in the electorate. And it means a couple of things. One, they just turned out to vote at higher rates, but it also means that the demographics of the electorate look like the country did 10 years ago. So it's a little bit like a time machine, right? Because of that differential turnout, it kind of drags the country back in terms of actual demographics to where we were about 10 years ago.
So that means about 1 in 7 Americans is a white evangelical. But when you look at what happened on Tuesday, about 1 in 5 of the voters who went and cast their vote were white evangelicals. And that means that 81%, so they basically brought a voting block to the polls. So that voting block controlled a much larger percentage of those final votes. So when we look at the votes and we see that huge number for Trump, the Trump number is clearly inflated by that. It's a white evangelical vote en masse. And the Harris number is just sort of business as usual politics. Plus, I suspect that when we get the number of the unaffiliateds, we're going to see that they're less represented in the overall voting proportion, would be my guess.
Let me look. I think we may actually have that. They're looks like about 3 points underrepresented. Yeah, they're 24% of the electorate. They're 27% of the population. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So people who would have voted differently, basically at 75% levels, didn't show up.